All right. Break is over. Let's come back. Please settle down. We invite the others who are outside the hall. Please come in. And we will start now. Let's welcome back our teacher, Dr. Gary McIntosh.
We ready? Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, well, we're back. Back to the end of the day. Well, congratulations for hanging in there. It's been a long day, but it's been a good day. Been a good opportunity to get to know some of you. Well, so let's go to page 15, and we'll begin to look at the notes now that we have. One of the questions that came up, and by the way, I appreciate all of the questions that you gave and you sent in. I won't be able to answer all of those. Man, there was quite a few of those questions, but I do appreciate it a great deal. But one of the questions was, you know, if Jesus says, I will build my church, it kind of sounds like we're building the church with the things that I'm suggesting to you. But I would point you to 1 Corinthians, where the Apostle Paul says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. And I would ask you to consider the growth of the church similar to being a farmer. If you were a farmer, you would be praying that God would bless your crop and God would give you a large crop at the end of the year. But even though you recognize that God is the one that causes the crop to grow, you know, the farmer doesn't cause the plant to grow. But what the farmer's job is to till the ground and to fertilize it and take out the rocks and take out the weeds and to prepare the ground and to plant the seed. And then to make sure that the seed, that you irrigate it and you water it and you make sure that the bugs don't eat it and you make sure that it's got the right nutrients in the soil. And so the farmer, even though the farmer's praying that God grows the crop, the farmer's out there working very hard to make sure that the ground is ready and that the crop is protected and that the crop is able to grow. And I think that's the way it is. Yes, Jesus is the one who grows the church. You and I don't grow the church. But our job is to do the planting and to do the watering. And so the things that I'm talking about this afternoon are things that we need to do. In faith, we make adjustments. We make changes in the church, trusting that God will bring the growth. But we have to do the preparation of the soil. We have to do the watering. So for our last session tonight, what I want to do is talk more specifically about some of the things that typically we have to do to prepare that soil and to make sure that the crop grows. So let's ask the question, how do churches grow? How do churches grow? Well, most of us think that churches grow kind of in a straight line. That a church takes off, the Holy Spirit empowers the church, and the church just takes off in a straight line. But that's not actually how churches grow. The way churches grow is that they grow in steps. So the church will grow a little bit, and then it plateaus, and it grows a little bit, and it plateaus. It grows a little bit, and it plateaus. It grows a little bit, and it plateaus. Someone asked the question, is there a difference between a plateau and stagnation? And yes, there is. You see, every church gets on a plateau. So what will happen is, if you look over here with my red dot, the church will grow, but then the church will plateau. But then what happens is the church grows again, and then it plateaus. Now what happens at each one of those plateaus or each one of those stair steps? The church grows, And then the people have to have a period of rest. They have to have a time of relaxation. And we have to make adjustments to the ministry to prepare it so it can grow to the next level. And then it grows again, and it gets to another level, and then it kind of plateaus again. Now, that's not a stagnation, it's a plateau where we kind of take a rest, and we then readjust the ministry so we can move to the next level. Now, when it becomes stagnation is when we get stuck on one of these plateaus. So maybe we grow to 60 people, and instead of making the adjustments to grow a little bit larger, we just get stuck there, and 20 years later, we're still 60 people. That's probably stagnation because we get stuck at that particular level. So we don't want to get stuck at those levels if we can at least avoid it. So, number 2 on your notes, page 15. So, research has discovered that there's regular plateaus in the growth of churches. There's regular plateaus in the growth of churches. Now, I have not done a detailed study of Manila or the Philippines. But what I'm showing you up here is the typical plateau points of churches in the United States. My guess is that these will be pretty close to what really is happening here in Manila, but I can't guarantee it because I haven't had the opportunity to study it. But in the United States, we find that a lot of churches get stuck, went too far. A lot of churches get stuck right down here at about 35 people. And you've got this in your notes. Some churches will be stuck around 85, some around 125, some 200. Now, throughout the world, the major plateau point for most churches is 200. Probably 80% or 85% of all churches around the world are 200 people or smaller. And one of the reasons for that is that most churches tend to be very close communities of faith. We tend to be like one big happy family. Well, how big can a family get before we lose that feel of that family church? Well, maybe 100, maybe 150. How many people can you get in your living room? How many people can you get in your house? Well, maybe 20. Depending on how big your house is, maybe you could get 80 people in your house. Some of you may have really big houses. Maybe you can get 100 people or 150 people in your houses. But see, most of us don't have houses where you can get 800 people in them. You know, most of our houses, 20, 40, 50, 60 people is what we could probably get in the house for a holiday or something like that. So churches tend to be small. They tend to be just these family units where people can know each other and love each other and care for each other as a big group. And by and large, across the United States, churches don't get much larger than 200. Even in the United States, the average church in the United States is about 90 people, even though we have huge megachurches. Isn't that not true in Manila? You've got huge megachurches here, but probably most churches would be 50 people, 75 people, 60 people, 80 people. I have not seen any statistics. Maybe you have. But most of the time, churches are smaller. You do have a plateau around 400, 800, 1,200, 3,000, 6,000, and 10,000. We're not going to talk about all of those today because I'm making the assumption that most of us are probably not in churches that large. But we may talk a little bit about it this afternoon, but not a whole lot. But there's just these regular plateau points that churches get to, and then they tend to get stuck there for a long period of time. So, 4 basic principles before we get into some specifics. 4 basic principles. Okay, principle number 1. This is on the middle of page 15. Plateaus function like floors in a building. The floors offer support, and the ceiling offers resistance. Now, I found this very helpful to understand what happens in churches. Here we are in a building, and there are floors below us and there are floors above us. Now, the floor that we're standing on, that we're sitting on, is actually offering support. It's supporting our weight. It's supporting the weight of these chairs. It's supporting the weight of the piano and the stage and all of everything that's sitting on the floor. The floor is supporting that so that it doesn't fall down through to the next floor. Now, at the same time, above us up here is a ceiling. And the ceiling then is offering resistance to the weight that's above us. So I don't know how many floors there are above us, but there's several floors above us, and all that weight is sitting on that ceiling above us. Let's hope that it holds very firm, because I wouldn't want to be underneath it if it came crashing down. So that is the way that plateaus tend to work. A plateau in a church tends to create a support or a bottom number that we tend to get above, and we tend to not drop below that number, but it tends to create a resistance to the top of growing any larger. So the way I like to illustrate this, and you have this in your notes, let's say that you're a church of 80 people. And so what will happen is your bottom floor might be, say, 65 or 60 people, and the ceiling might be 100. So what happens is throughout the year, as people attend your church, your worship attendance goes up and down. So one Sunday you got 60, another Sunday you got 80, another Sunday you have 70, another Sunday you have 80, then you're down to 60 again, then you're up to 70, then you're up to 100, and your attendance tends to go up and down. But if you've ever noticed, there's a tendency in your church that even though the attendance goes up and down, it stays within a certain range. You never drop down to 30. You're always maybe to 60, and that's about it. But likewise, you never jump up to maybe 150. You jump up to 100 or maybe 125. And so what happens is there's a natural creation in the church of these floors and these ceilings that offer support and resistance. But of course, sometimes what happens is something happens and all of a sudden you jump up to another level. So maybe now you're averaging 125. Well, you have a new floor that's created and you have a new ceiling that's created. And so now for a while what will happen is you'll have a high of 150 and you'll have a low of 100, and your attendance will jump up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, but relatively speaking, you stay within the same range. So the question is, how do we create the energy, so to speak, to jump up to another level? Because there's whatever level you're at, there's going to be a natural resistance at the top to break above that particular ceiling. And likewise, there's a supportive base, and you tend not to drop below it. So, another principle here. Breaking through resistant ceilings requires a growth engine. Breaking through resistant ceilings requires a growth engine. Now, here's the way I want you to think of this. In the past, you don't have this particular chart. In the past, we used to talk in church growth about breaking barriers. Now, barriers, most of us in our mind, we think of like a wall that you've got to kind of break through the wall. But I want you to forget that kind of concept. I want you to think of something different with me here. I grew up in a state in the United States called Colorado. And in Colorado, we have huge mountains. They go up to 14,000 feet high in the air. And when you're driving a car and you're driving along a flat area and you look up ahead of you, and you see that the road starts going up into the mountains. What you naturally do in a car is that you put your foot down on the gas pedal, and that gives the car more energy, which allows it then to go up the hill. Now, when it gets up on the top of the hill, many times the land will flatten out again, and you can let off of the gas, and you just kind of go along on the plateau. But then you look up ahead again, and there's another road going up in the mountains a little bit higher. Well, you've got to put your foot on the gas again, give the car more energy, which helps it go up to the next level. So that's the way I want you to think about this. Here is your car's coming along, you give it gas, it goes up the hill. Once you get up the hill, you can kind of relax. This is the plateau. But then if you want to get to the next level, you got to give it some more energy, get it up over the top. Oh, now I can relax a little bit more. So when we think about going to the next level, it's not that we're breaking through anything. It's that what we're going to do is we're going to give the church more energy in order to allow it to make it up to the next level, to that next plateau point. I think that's a better way of thinking about it. So, basic principle number 3, I think. Growth happens. This is the top of page 16. Growth happens in cycles of 3 actions. You expand the base, you increase the mass, and then you stabilize. I'm going to show you what that means. You expand the base, you increase the mass, and you stabilize. So here's how this works. Okay, think of your church as a triangle. Within that triangle is all of your people, all of your ministries, all of your program. Now, if you want your church to grow, what you have to do is you have to expand your base first. And then by doing that, it allows you to increase the mass of your church and grow, and your church gets bigger. Okay, let's go back and let me talk you through this again. Let's take an example. Most churches only grow to the size of 10 people per leader in the church. And let me say that a different way. For every leader you have in the church, you will have 10 people in the church. So if you have 10 leaders in your church, you will have 100 people. 10 people per leader. If you have 5 leaders in your church, you will have 50 people. 10 people per leader. 5 leaders times 10, 50 people. You have 2 leaders in your church, you'll have 20 people. You have 100 leaders in your church, you'll have 1,000 people. Have 1,000 people. So let's say that you've got a church of 50 people. All right? So this church right here, this triangle, represents 50 people. The base down here represents your 5 leaders. You've got 5 leaders who are supporting the ministry of the church. And you've got 50 people. If you want to grow, part of your growth engine is you've got to develop more leaders. Now, leaders, by definition, have followers. So if you can create more leaders, the leaders themselves will find more followers and your church will grow. So part of the engine of growing a church of 50 is that the first thing I do is I expand my group of 5 leaders to 10 leaders.